41-7. I don't see anything negative. You got maybe Andre Johnson, James Casey's coming back. Can they do any better?
Of course they could do better, and I like what you stated. Andre Johnson, James Casey, they're coming back. And in this league, it's all about hitting your stride at the right time. We're almost at the midseason mark. They've played arguably their toughest opponent in Tennessee, and they just dismantled them without James Casey, Andre Johnson. They're only going to get better when those guys return. You have to be excited if you're a Houston Texan fan. I just don't see how they don't make the playoffs this year.
Okay, they played 5 teams with winning records. They're 2-3. They've got 3 left. They've got to play at Cincinnati. Then they play, I can't remember who they play, at Tampa. Then they host Atlanta.
Right.
So they've got 3 left. The Jacksonville game may not be too easy on the road based on what the Jaguars just did to Baltimore and almost did the previous week in Pittsburgh. So now here come the Texans. They're coming up against Jacksonville, and they're going to run, which we talked about last week. Will they keep this philosophy?
Oh, yeah, I think they will keep the philosophy, and you're absolutely right. I don't think any game's easy. You could take whoever they have remaining on their schedule with the worst record, and it's not going to be an easy game. But what I like is they've put themselves at the top of the division. Just like you said, Jacksonville played very tough on Monday Night Football against the Baltimore Ravens, but they're just so far behind. I don't see them getting on a run and the Texans go on a slump to allow them to get back in the race. I think this is the Texans' year, and when you look at the running backs, it's a big reason. I believe they have the best 1-2 punch in the NFL. Arian Foster is a premier back, arguably the best back in the NFL. And Ben Tate, he's no slouch. He's probably the best number 2 back, second option for running in the NFL. These guys are getting 100-yard games. They're just picking them up like it's normal. Every single day they touch the ball 20 times or more, it seems like they get 100 yards. I really like the 1-2 punch. I can't even remember the last time we saw a 1-2 punch like this. And when you talk about multiple running backs having success, you have to honor the offensive line because they're creating the holes for these guys to run through, and it's also because of them why these guys are so successful.
You mentioned playoffs. Gary Kubiak says, we can't think about that, the old cliche, one at a time. But how do you keep players when you're constantly being reminded about it by the media, by the fans? How do you keep the players from not talking and thinking about it? Well, you played 12 years. You were in the playoffs. Did y'all ever talk about it?
Well, it was a goal of ours, and we talked amongst ourselves. But one thing that they have to do, they can't watch shows like this, Radio Faces, brought to you by HCZ TV, because I'm just going to talk about how I don't see the Texans not making the playoffs. But they have to stick to that philosophy. Of course, it's cliche, but they have to really buy into the one game at a time. And they can't start reading your great articles on Cron.com and everybody else around here who's getting excited, talking about how great they are. They really need to just stay focused at the task at hand and understand they can lose a couple more games and still win this division, because we will talk about this later in the show. It's one of the worst divisions in the NFL, and the Texans are playing good ball. But the key is to make sure that they don't start believing the hype and they stay focused on that one game a week mentality.
Will Baltimore losing to Jacksonville get their attention more for the next game than, say, if the Ravens had blown out the Jaguars?
Definitely. They know now, okay, Jacksonville's had a tough stretch. They lost 5 in a row, but this is still a football team. It still has the best elite football players in the world playing on it, or they wouldn't be in the NFL. So, I think it just woke them up. I understand that the players know that any team that steps in front of them is a good team, is going to be a good opponent. But with Jacksonville beating Baltimore the way they did and the defensive effort that they put forth, it's really going to wake up the Houston Texan offense.
They've still only suffered one season-ending injury to a starter, that being Mario Williams. And for people who don't think Mario's important, just ask Antonio Smith, who hasn't had a sack since Mario went out. You mentioned earlier James Casey and Andre Johnson, but we know they're going to come back 100%. Now, they lose Danielle Manning. Could be gone for the year, could not be. Already had surgery on a fractured fibula. Troy Nolan's played before. Then you got 2 rookies, a safety, Shiloh Keogh, and then you got, with Keogh, you got Brandon Harris going to move to safety. How do you think this loss is going to affect them over the next, even if they get him back in between, it will still be 6 or 7 weeks?
Right, it's going to affect them, and when he comes back, he's still not going to be himself. He's still going to have to feel his way around for a couple of weeks before he has confidence in that leg, before he has confidence knowing that he could land on that leg, he could take a hit on that leg, and knowing that it's healed. It's definitely going to affect. Right now, the defense is playing very well without Mario Williams. Not so much that the guys who replaced him or stepped up. I really think Wade Phillips has stepped up as a defensive caller. He's calling these blitzes. He's providing pressure from everywhere. Guys like Tim Jamison are stepping up. The defensive backs are holding their men a little longer, giving the front seven time to get there. Brian Cushing is playing out of his mind. So I like the way everybody has rallied around the loss of Mario Williams, and they're just going to have to do that again. Brandon Harris is going to have to show why he was a second-round pick and be a football player. Right now, he might not be able to get on the field as a cornerback, but now you have a chance to get in during nickel and dime situations, passing situations, and he's going to have to show everybody why he was a second-round pick.
I got a quiz for you. I know you'll ace it since you went to Rice. Who is the only team in the league that's defense ranks in the top 8 in all 3 major categories?
Could it be the Houston Texans?
Isn't that amazing? After they were 32nd in pass defense, they're 8th. After they were 30th in defense, I think they're 7th or 8th, and they've moved down to 8th or 9th in against the run. They're in the top 10 in the 6 major stats: offense, defense, rushing, against the run, passing, against the pass. No other team in the league's in the top 10.
You know what? If they gave awards for Coordinator of the Year, Wade Phillips would have to have his name in that hat.
Well, there are some awards at the end of the year that do that, and you're right. Wade would be one of the early favorites. Now, do you think Troy Nolan can take over well enough for Manning?
I've liked Troy Nolan. You know, I understand that the media, the fans, they said in the offseason, we need a cornerback, we need a safety, and Rick Smith did a great job answering that call. But Troy Nolan, you know as much as I do, you've covered him just longer than anybody in Houston. He makes plays in the preseason, in practice, preseason games. He was injured his first year, but when he gets a chance, it just seems like he's always making a big hit, a PBU, or an interception. Now he's going to get a chance to be a regular starter for weeks to come, and that's what you want. You always want your chance as a backup to prove to be a starter. Then when you have Daniel Manning coming back, you have that little healthy controversy, if that makes sense, on who should be the starter. You always want 2 guys who ought to be able to start at each position.
Only one of those guys got $9 million guaranteed. Won't be much of a controversy. BlaineGabbert, rookie quarterback, coming up against Jacksonville. Going back to the start of the 2009 season, lost to Sanchez, lost to Flacco. Last year they beat Rusty Smith, and they got beat by Tebow. So they're 1-4 against rookie starters over the last 2 years, which stinks, of course. What do they got to do to beat Gabbert?
Just play their game. You know, well, those stats are great, but when you talk about Sanchez and when you talk about Flacco, you're talking about 2 of the best defenses and the best, most effective running games in the NFL. So it wasn't just those rookie quarterbacks that beat the Houston Texans. They're just going to have to play the way they've played. Gabbert, he doesn't even look like he's NFL ready right now. I understand he was going against an amazing defense in Baltimore Ravens in the Monday night game, but he just didn't look ready. The coach calling just didn't seem like they had confidence in him as a quarterback yet. They just wanted to feed the ball to MJD and throw the short passes and make sure he didn't lose the game for them. That's what Jacksonville's going to have to do, but I don't think the Houston Texans are going to have to do anything different. If anything, I feel like Wade Phillips could be a little looser with his calls and really send the house at Gabbert when he does drop back and throw.
You want to beat them, you beat Maurice Jones-Drew, and he every year since Kubiak's been here, he's had at least one really good game against them. They better hope it's not Sunday.